And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, January 13th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, air quality data may not tell the whole story, and that could put communities at risk. Plus, the data behind America's health decisions is starting to disappear, with potentially serious consequences. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. If you've spent any time on LinkedIn over the last month, you may have seen what seems to be a constant stream of executives leaving federal service. Whether they're retiring or they took the deferred resignation program or it's just through normal attrition, the exodus of federal executives feels more acute than ever before. In the Federal Report this week, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller takes a deep dive into the data and offers federal executives who recently left some advice to find success in the private sector. Jason's joining me now to discuss this. Jason, great to have you.
Thank you, Terry.
Now we're in the beginning of calendar year 2026. 2025 is over. What does the data tell us about federal executives who are leaving executive agencies?
Let me start with the senior executive service, because that's interesting because it dropped. The number of people in the SES dropped by about 551 people in 2025. Now, Terry, this is the data coming from the Office of Personnel Management. They put out a whole new, what they used to call FedScope. They updated it last week, and it's a great tool to use. I'd highly recommend folks looking for it. We'll have a link to it on federalnewsnetwork.com as well. So the number of SESers dropped by about 551. But if you look at the next level down, now we're talking about GS 14s and 15s. Now, these folks are in the pipeline to become SESers. They also saw a significant one-year reduction. I'll give you some numbers. GS 14s in 2024, there are about 143,000 of them, according to OPM. In 2025, at the end, there was about 135,200, so almost 8,000 fewer GS 14s. When you look at GS 15s, same drop, about 63,200 in 2024. That dropped to 58,200 in 2025. Again, about 5,000 fewer. Now, if you look at both of these, what's interesting is both reductions came after years and years of growth. For example, in 2019, there were about 117,600 people at the GS-14 level. That's an 8,000 drop between 24 and 25, brings that number back to really all the growth they've seen since 2023. So just to give you a sense, the numbers that they took years and years to grow and grow and grow, and 1 year they dropped it back by after multiple years of growth. Now, GS-15s, it's less dramatic. They're racing growth, albeit smaller growth, since 2021. So I think what you're seeing is this pipeline of people are just got smaller, and that impacts the ability to grow these SESers. Now, overall, the change, we've talked about this quite a bit, Terry, about 317,000 fewer federal employees in 2025 than in 2024. Interestingly enough, OPM also tells us the median age of the federal worker remains at 47 years old. And about 13.5% of all feds are still eligible to retire, with SBA and NASA having the largest percentage of employees, more than 25%, who are eligible to retire.
As federal agencies are looking at this data, Jason, how concerned should they be about the pipeline of talent coming all the way up and then into and through the management ranks?
I think there's a lot of concerns if these trends continue, right? We have 1 year of trend. We have 1 year of data during the Trump administration after multiple years of growth. So we can't start ringing alarm bells. We can't start saying the world's going to end, right? But 1 year decline, and there are significant declines in the GS 14 and 15 levels and SES levels, that really does impact how agencies are managed, because until Congress cuts mission, until Congress says, hey, no, you no longer have to do this thing, whatever this thing is, those mission areas still have to be picked up. And actually, that's where Michelle Sutter, the director of the Senior Executive Association's board, talked to me. Now, she spent about 15 years in government before leaving last year under the DRP. She says the 1 year reductions in SESers, as well as what they're seeing in GS 14 and 15s, is worrisome for several reasons.
In conversations with our members, a consistent theme that we hear is that we have executive level employees that are literally at times doing the jobs of 3 to 4 people. And that's unprecedented, because it tells us that regardless of whether you're at the operational level or the executive level, you've got people functioning in roles sometimes that are outside of their daily operations that they would normally do. And the effect of this is it puts stress on the leaders. It makes it difficult to focus on mission delivery. And if you're having a tough time focusing on mission delivery, it makes it difficult to provide services to the American people.
Now, Sutter says this situation, obviously the burnout piece impact agency success, but it's also trickling down into the GS 14, 15 levels as well, who those folks work more at the operational level than maybe the top tactical policy level. Now, while these GS 14s and 15s may now have more opportunities to step in into acting or temporary roles since there's fewer SCSers that maybe would prepare them, Sutter says there's still, again, the same concerns: burnout, cuts to training, education opportunities, and the need to deal with constant change. Those are still big challenges for all of these employees. And Sutter says, listen, this means also the SCS pipeline also has been narrowed.
We need to really focus on our career senior executives. And I think over the next year, success is really going to depend on stabilizing leadership teams, being disciplined about the use of different roles, whether they be acting or permanent, and really investing in executive development and recognizing that executive effectiveness is critical to mission delivery. And as we know, this is not about routine federal leadership as it was in the past. How agencies support career executives now will absolutely shape continuity, performance, and leadership capacity well beyond the transition.
Now, SEA's Sutter says SEA obviously was pleased to see OPM coming out with new training and education programs. She hopes that the changes that OPM is offering, agencies will have funding for that and give, obviously, employees the time to take advantage of these new courses.
Jason, we mentioned in the intro, just seeing all of these posts on LinkedIn as people are trying to make the transition from public service to the private sector. What advice are you hearing, some things that they should keep in mind as they start looking or continue to look for a new position?
The market definitely is tighter. I hear that all the time. You know, the once where you could find a job if you're coming out of government fairly easily, that's not necessarily the case anymore. And Terry, you've experienced this. You probably know tons of people who have left government for a new job in the private sector, lasted less than a year, lasted less than 6 months. That's not an unusual sight. In fact, I talked to one of those people. I'll call this person Andy, not his real name. He left federal service earlier this year. I talked to one of them. His name is Andy, not his real name. He left federal service earlier this year after more than a decade. Andy worked in the private sector before coming into government, so that he had some experience there. But after less than a year in the private sector in his new job, he left that position too. Now, he tells me there was a little bit of mismatch with expectations, probably both on his part, but also on the company's part. He thought the role he would fill would make use of his background, his skills at a policy level. But the company was looking for someone at a more technical level who could help them at a more tactical level. So again, here's that mismatch, tactical versus, kind of operational. And he says too many times people in these companies don't really understand how to leverage government executives and government executive expertise, not just his company, but more broadly across the private sector. Now, one thing he did say was he gained the perspective that, many times private sector companies are looking to hire people with government experience, but they expect those people to grow their business by winning contracts. And Andy says if you're at the senior level government person coming in the private sector world, you need to be prepared to do a lot of educating of your new company about how you think you should be used. And he used a great example. He says if you're a screwdriver and the company wants to use you like a hammer, probably not the best fit. And I thought that's something we all can kind of put our mind around. Terry, real quick, I also talked to Tim Teal. He's the CEO and founder of the Bellwether Group. He's a former NSA and U.S. Cyber Command official. And he posted a lot of really solid advice on LinkedIn and then offered me some further insights by email. Like what we saw with Andy, Teal says a lot of the exits he's seen over the years are not really about competence. It's really about mismatched expectations. The executive thinks they're there to advise and shape strategy, and the company expects them to have an immediate impact. He says a lot of times people come in and say, I have all this authority. I have statutes, I know my roles. I know the mission. The industry says, no, we want you to come in and help us with our revenue, margin, and growth. And then finally, another thing that Tim Teal talked about was reputation in the government means a lot. In the private sector, reputation is all about performance. So yes, it can open the door for you, but you have to perform. And if you don't perform, your reputation doesn't matter.
These are such important lessons. Jason, did you get any input into the most common mistakes federal executives make when they get into a new position?
There's several that pop out. I'm sure, Terry, you probably have your own list that you could give, help us out with. But going back to Tim Thiel, he talks about successful government leaders don't cling to their status. They learn the business, they tie their value to outcomes, and they never confuse respect with immunity. Thiel says the biggest mistake he sees is people negotiating the title before they understand their business. Now, if you don't know what the company does to make money and who they buy from or where they're hurting, then you're kind of walking in blind. So obviously, do your homework. And now that's an easy thing to say, but I think what Tim is talking about here is you really need to take a deep dive. And then another thing that Thiel says that new federal executives that going into the private sector should really understand is don't accept a role that has vague charters. If no one can clearly explain what success looks like in 6 months, then that role will probably not last 6 months. Now, as for Andy, he's going out, he's going to do his own thing, test the waters. Maybe he'll go back to private sector. Maybe he'll go back to government one day. But he goes, this experience definitely has been eye-opening. And while he doesn't blame the company and he doesn't blame himself for things not working out, it's definitely an experience that he's better for. And I think, from his perspective, why he decided to talk to me was so others would not kind of have that same challenge. And the best piece of advice he gave me was when he was interviewing with this company, he had a little tickle in his gut that said, maybe this isn't right, but he ignored that tickle. So Terry, if you got a tickle in your gut, don't ignore it.
Jason, that is great advice. I've lived that out myself. Thanks for bringing us the story.
My pleasure.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, and you can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, the data behind America's health decisions is starting to disappear with potentially serious consequences. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Behind every health policy and intervention is data, but some of that data may soon be gone. A new analysis warns of cascading effects on research, programs, and health equity unless action is taken now. Joel Gerton, president and founder of the Center for Open Data Enterprise, is here to explain what's at stake and what might be done. Joel, it's great to have you back.
Oh, thanks for having me, Terry.
CODE, your organization, has been doing some work lately looking at public health data and the absence or loss of it. Tell us what you're watching and why it's so important.
Sure. So the work that we're doing now is part of an effort being led by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which has become really concerned about the potential for some real disruptions to what you can think of as the public health data infrastructure. This is the data on all kinds of things, on disease rates, on social determinants of health, on demographic variables, that's really critical to understanding health in this country and working to improve it for all Americans. And we've seen a lot of changes over the last year that are very troubling. There are attempts to make some of this data unavailable to the public. Some major research studies have been discontinued. There have been deep cuts to the federal staff that are responsible for collecting some of this data, and just cuts to research funding, for example, from the NIH overall. So it really adds up to a kind of cross-cutting risk to the infrastructure of public health data that we've relied on for decades.
Talk to us about why this data is so important, why it's the government's responsibility maybe to keep it up to speed, and whether it's a policy shift that's driving this, or is it just individual actions?
Well, from what we can tell, it's, I would say, a number of policy decisions that are all related to how the Trump administration sees the president's priorities and how they want to implement those. So it's not like we've seen a wholesale destruction of data, but we've seen a lot of kinds of targeted changes. Anything related to DEI, to diversity issues, to looking at health inequity, that's that's at risk. Any kinds of data related to environmental justice or climate justice, that's at risk. Data related to the health of LGBTQ people, particularly trans individuals, that's at risk. So we're seeing these kinds of policy priorities of the administration playing out in how they relate to the collection of public health data. And this data is critical because government data, number one, some of these data collections are expensive to do and only the government can afford it. And also federal data has a kind of credibility and as a kind of centralized source for information that other studies don't have. For example, the administration recently discontinued the USDA's study of food insecurity, which is critical to tracking hunger in America and is going to be especially important as SNAP benefits are cut back. There are other organizations and institutions that study hunger in America. The University of Michigan has a study, NORC has a study, but the federal study is the benchmark, and losing those benchmarks is what's troubling.
One of the recommendations, just to skip ahead, is that more states and localities and nonprofits collect this data if the federal government is not going to. But what does that mean for trust in the data? You mentioned that, federal data is usually the gold standard. If we have to rely on a dispersed group of interested organizations to collect it, what happens both to the reliability of the data and the trust in the data?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that we and a lot of other organizations are looking at now. One of the things that's important to remember is that a lot of what we see as federal data actually begins with the states. It's data that's collected by the states and then fed up kind of to federal agencies that then aggregate it, interpret it, and so on. So one of the questions people have now is, could we take some of that state data that already exists and collect it and aggregate it and study it in different ways if the federal government is going to kind of abdicate that role? There was some very interesting work during COVID, for example, when the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg Center for Government Excellence pulled together data from all over the country around COVID rates at a time when the CDC was not really doing that effectively, and their website really became the go-to source. So we have seen places where it's possible to pull state data together in ways that have a lot of credibility and a lot of impact. Some of the issues are, what do the states really need to make that data collection effective? So regardless of what the federal government does with their data, they need mandates from the federal government to collect it, or it won't be collected. They need funding. About 80% of the CDC's budget actually goes to state and local, and a lot of that is for data collection, so they need that funding stream to do the work. And they also need networks, which are starting to develop now, where they can sort of share expertise and share insights to make data work on a regional level.
I'm speaking with Joel Gerton. He's the president and founder of the Center for Open Data Enterprise. Well, Joel, then let's back up a little bit and talk about the roundtable and the research that led into this paper. How did you do it, and what were the key insights?
Sure. So one of the things that our organization, Center for Open Data Enterprise, or CODE, does is we hold roundtables with experts who have different kinds of perspectives on data. And that's what we did here with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation support. We pulled together a group of almost 80 experts in Washington last summer, and we led them through a very kind of highly facilitated, orchestrated set of breakout discussions. We also did a survey in advance. We did some individual interviews with people. We did a lot of our own desk research. The result is a paper that we've just recently published on the future of ensuring the future of essential health data for all Americans. You can find it on our website, odenterprise.org. That's odenterprise.org. If you go to our publications page and do the health section in the drop-down from publications, you'll find it right there, along with a lot of other op-eds and things that we published related to it. Putting out this paper was really the result of pulling together a lot of information from literally hundreds of pages of notes from those breakout discussions, as well as our own research and as well as tracking everything that we could see in the news. But one of the things that I want to really emphasize, in addition to the analysis that we've done of what's happening and what some of the solutions could be, which is it's a fairly lengthy paper and hopefully useful, we've also put together an online resource hub of what we think are the 70 or so most important public health data sets. And I want to really stress this because we think it's actually a model for how to look at some of the issues affecting federal data in a lot of areas. We found that by working with these 80 or so experts and doing additional research and surveying them and talking to them, there's a lot of kind of commonality and common agreement on what are the kinds of data that are really, really critical to public health and what are those sources. Once you know that, it becomes possible for advocates to argue for why we need to keep this data and how it needs to be applied. And it's also possible to ask questions like, for this particular kind of data, could somebody other than the federal government collect it? And could we develop supplemental or even alternative sources? So we really feel that that kind of analysis, we hope, is a step forward in really figuring out how to address these issues in a practical way.
That's really helpful and also a great prototype for, as you say, data in other areas across the federal government that may or may not be getting the visibility that they used to get. What were the key recommendations that come out of the paper?
Well, we had recommendations on a couple of different levels. We had recommendations to, as we talked about before, to really look at state and local governments as important sources of data. They are already, but could more be done with those? This includes, for example, not just government data collections the way it's done now, but using community-based organizations to help collect data from the community in a way that ultimately serves communities. We're also very interested in the potential for what are being called non-traditional data sources, like the analysis of social media data and other kinds of things that can give insights into health. But I think, probably the single most important recommendations at the federal level are to continue funding for these critical data sources and to recognize how important they are and to really, recognize the principle that there's an obligation to understand health and improve health for all Americans, which means looking at data that you can disaggregate by demographic variables and so on. I want to say we have had some really positive signs, I think, from Congress, particularly on the overall issue of supporting health research. And when we talk about NIH research, remember, some of that is really lab medical research, but a lot of it is research on public health, research on social factors, research on behavioral factors, all of this kind of critical work. And the president's budget actually recommended a 40% cut in NIH funding, which is draconian. The Senate Appropriations Committee over the summer said we actually do not want to do that, and in fact we want to increase the NIH budget by a small amount. So I think what we're seeing is there's a lot of support, bipartisan support in Congress for protecting research funding that ultimately is the source of a lot of the data we need. Some of this is just because it's a shared value, and some of it is because those research dollars go to research institutions in congressional districts that representatives and senators want to see continue to be funded. So I think that basic fear that a lot of us had a few months ago, that research was simply going to be defunded, I think that may not happen, and I would hope that Congress continues both the funding and also support for not only some of this research funding, but agencies like the National Center for Health Statistics or for health research and quality, which have been under threat, to really recognize their importance and sustain them.
One of the challenges we might face, even if Congress does appropriate back at the prior levels, is that much of the infrastructure has been reduced or eliminated, and that's people and that's ongoing projects. How long do you think it will take to kind of rebuild back up to the data collection level that we had before, if we do see appropriation levels back to what they were?
I think that's a really critical question. Early in the administration, 10,000 jobs at HHS were cut, about a quarter of those from the CDC. But there has been some pushback. There was an attempt during the shutdown to do massive layoffs in HHS and CDC. The courts ruled against that. So I'm hoping that we can prevent more of that kind of brain drain. It will take a while to restaff and really get everything up to speed, but we think it's doable, and we hope we can get on that path.
I've been speaking with Joel Gerton. He's the president and founder of the Center for Open Data Enterprise. Joel, thanks so much for elevating the importance of this critical issue.
Thank you so much.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, could psychedelics help stop the veteran suicide crisis? Congress seems ready to find out. But first, air quality data may not tell the whole story, and that could put communities at risk. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. EPA may be relying on air quality data that underreports pollution. Biased data can mean declaring areas clean when they're not. A recent report from the agency's IG warns that gaps in EPA oversight could expose communities to harmful pollution. Assistant Inspector General Paul Bergstrand is here to explain the risks and the fixes. Mr. Bergstrand, it's great to have you on the show today.
Wonderful to be here.
Your office recently took a closer look at how EPA oversees state and local air monitoring schedules. I'm wondering, was there a specific concern or a trend that raised the alarm with you?
Yes, thank you. Well, we came across a study from 2021 that had some analyses showing that there was a difference in pollution levels when air monitors were off compared to when they were on. And this interests us in several ways. So just to be clear, it is completely normal for monitors to be off. It happens because monitors have a schedule where they're designed to be off or where there is some kind of technical difficulty that they're correcting. But what interested us is the fact that there was a difference between when they were on and off in terms of pollution levels. They should be the same. And so we want to take a closer look for ourselves to see how the EPA is overseeing this issue and if they were doing anything to fix it.
You looked at thousands of monitoring sites. What did you discover about the trends once you dug into the data?
We use satellite and model data as alternatives to data from regulatory air monitors to compare air quality when monitoring sites are off and when they're on. And we found that for fine particulate matter, which was the focus of our evaluation, it amounted to an average increase of 4% for monitors that operate on daily schedule and 9% for sites that operate in 1 every 3 days. And then separately, we found that 35.7% of intermittent modelers had worse air quality on average when they were offline.
What difference does that make for public health?
Well, importantly, the EPA sets standards for air quality, and if the standards aren't met, then the area is in non-attainment. And that means that there can be harmful cardiovascular effects, reduced visibility, contribute to water acidification. And so poor data quality means that some areas that should be in non-attainment might not be designated correctly.
There's an interesting catch-22 here around transparency. The EPA publishes the monitoring schedule online, which we would think would be good, and people can know about that. But it creates some perverse incentives for the regulated agencies. Talk us through how that works.
Yes, it has been their regular practice to publish those schedules. But I want to note that our analysis did not indicate any malicious behavior. But it is a concern that someone could take advantage of that scheduling to choose to conduct maintenance and shut down a monitor when they know there will be increased ambient air pollution. So it was a concern of ours, and the EPA saw the concern and they took action actually during our work and decided not to publish the 2025 schedule. And they've agreed to continue not to publish the schedule.
Is that the best solution here? Are there other factors that you might consider or recommend?
Well, in addition to that, we've asked them to do some more data analysis during their quality control checks of state and local data. And this would, using some of the techniques we had in our report that they could replicate and improve upon, to come up with their own analyses to look for data that might be poor or missing.
And you also flagged that local agencies may have incentives to underreport pollution. So again, we have some mixed messages kind of happening here. What drives those incentives?
Yeah. Again, we did not identify any malicious behavior, but as you say, there are incentives. If the EPA does designate a state as a non-attainment, there are expensive controls they have to put in place. So there is that incentive to try and hide the pollution, so to speak. So they can eliminate the data point basically from the data the EPA is collecting. So, but it also could be completely normal that the data points are missing. And that's why we're suggesting that the EPA do its own analysis.
I'm speaking with Paul Bergstrand. He is Assistant Inspector General, Office of Special Review and Evaluation for the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of the Inspector General. Does EPA have the capacity and the tools to strengthen the oversight in that way that you were just recommending?
We think they do. They can use similar or improved statistical methods using these alternative satellite data and modeling to help their quality control checks, definitely.
Are they using those tools now?
I can't speak to what they're doing now, whether they are or not, but we know they've done it in the past. They've done it in 2022, where they looked at missing air pollution data from 2002 to 2018.
So you mentioned that EPA was taking action to address some of your concerns even as the evaluation was going on. Are there further recommendations that you've made that you hope the EPA takes action on?
Yes, they've agreed to both of our recommendations. And that second recommendation is that they incorporate some of these analyses into really spot checking. And what's important is that they can improve upon what we did to identify pollution that's underreported.
Are there things that communities should be doing themselves to maybe fill in gaps where the EPA isn't monitoring or just get better data out to their citizens?
We didn't look at that aspect in our report, but it's a very interesting one. And I know there are maybe some grant programs or programs to get local air monitors, but in my experience, and I'm not speaking from the body of this report here, but in my experience, those are not used to collect regulatory data. So I'm not quite sure on how to connect those dots from maybe your citizen scientists using an air monitor to the data being used by the EPA.
We've done a quick overview of your report and its findings and recommendations, but one of the things I want to point out to folks is that this information is really accessible. You've done an interesting job of making it available through what's called a story map. Tell us about how EPA is using that kind of a tool to get this kind of information out.
Yes, we wanted to be innovative in the way we're portraying this complex data so it's more accessible. And a story map is a web-friendly format where you can scroll at your leisure to look at dynamic information, graphics, maps, just another way to present the information to the audience that we think has a lot of possibilities.
So I don't have to print off a 100-page paper and put it under my pillow so I can absorb it while I sleep. This is very cool. Are you using it in other reports?
We hope to be. This was our first one, and it was sort of a pilot project, and we are definitely going to be looking forward to more opportunities to use it.
I've been speaking with Paul Bergstrand. He's Assistant Inspector General in the Office of Special Review and Evaluation for the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of the Inspector General. Thanks so much for sharing this report with us.
You're welcome.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, could psychedelics help stop the veteran suicide crisis? Congress seems ready to find out. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Innovative Therapy Center of Excellence Act aims to give the VA dedicated capacity to research emerging treatments for PTSD and other invisible wounds. We'll hear from Representatives Lou Correa of California and Jack Bergman of Michigan, the lawmakers behind the push, about what it means for veterans and families. Congressman Correa and Congressman Bergman, thank you so much for being here today. Congressman Correa, I want to start with you. You, too, are co-sponsors of the Innovative Therapy Center of Excellence Act. Tell us a little bit about the bill and why it's such a priority for you as Congress gets back to work.
Congressman Correa, Orange County, California. First, my priority is taking care of those who fought and sacrificed so much for this country's freedom. It's veterans. Every day, 20 to 40 veterans take their own lives here in the United States. One is too many, let alone up to 40 a day. Trying to find solutions, trying to find cures, therapies for veterans. And in my opinion, everything I've seen, this is a cure. Not only a treatment, but a cure. Psychedelics cures veterans. And that's not coming from Lou, but rather my discussions with veterans. But not only is it just having this medicine there, it's really a process. It's making sure that we have experts who know what they're doing when they treat veterans. Ibogaine, one of the psychedelics that's widely used right now, is a very powerful medication, very powerful drug from Africa. If you don't have people that know what they're doing, we could have people injured or killed, lose their lives when they're being through treatment. So what I want to do with this legislation is prepare, plow the field, so that when we can administer these medicines for our veterans, it's done by people who are experts and who know what they're doing.
Congressman Bergman, you've seen the effects of PTSD up close in your own service in the Marine Corps. What is it about this legislation that would address the veteran mental health crisis in a way that current VA programs don't?
Well, when it comes to our job as legislators, to complement what Lou said, we're here as elected representatives to make sure we do the right things for all the American people, but especially focused here on veterans. And it's our role as Congress to provide the guidelines and the guardrails, and in some cases, the money, to enable the good research that in some small ways is being done, but we need more of it, and we need to bolster the quality of the research, but also bolster the confidence by risk-averse bureaucracies here. And not, bureaucracies aren't bad, but risk aversion is one of the challenges that we have. If we're going to send money for a program or a project, or in this case, research into alternative therapies for veterans, we need the researchers to go after it and feel that we've got their back so that they can turn out the results that'll lead to therapies that'll help the veterans lead a more proactive, full life.
And Jack, not only do we want that research, we also want a deadline. We want to make sure people move on this stuff. Think about the situation in the United States. 60, 70 years of a war on drugs. It's very hard for people to start thinking that things like psychedelics can actually be a treatment, a medicine for PTSD, a medicine for mental health, a medicine for alcoholism, a medicine to treat drug addiction. It's very hard. It's contradictory. And what we've got to do is change, like Jack said, that bureaucratic thinking. And it's not easy, but we've got to do it.
So, Congressman Correa, can you walk us through the core provisions of this bill? What would these centers of excellence look like, and how would they operate within the VA system?
We want to keep it as flexible as possible, but the goal here is to make sure that these centers of excellence train people, have trained individuals who actually know how to implement these new treatments, these new medications, these new medicines. I've gone to Mexico a number of times. I've seen this treatment implemented. It's not done in a back room somewhere. It's done in a hospital setting. You have emergency room technicians there. You have emergency room nurses prepared in the event something doesn't go as planned. I've also talked to veterans who have gone through this treatment and come out very well, and a couple of them said, almost cost me my life. So you've got to make sure that you know what you're doing. And again, I use the word plow the field, the term plow the field, because when this stuff is the VA says you can do this, well, who's going to actually implement it? And that's the goal. Make sure it's ready to go.
Congressman Bergman, you addressed the risk aversion kind of inherent in our bureaucracy. This bill would establish 5 centers. Is that enough to overcome the risk aversion and really make a national impact?
Well, I believe it's a start, because we already have a model in place that the Centers of Excellence for Traumatic Brain Injury, the 4 centers that were established back in the 90s, Palo Alto, Richmond, Minneapolis, and Tampa were the original 4. So there's such a thing as starting too small and starting too big. So I believe that this number is right. And you almost, if you could, in an ideal world, the mindset within the research centers is that it's a leapfrog of who can do better in a very positive way. So we all learn from the successes of the others. Not just research for research's sake, as Lou said. We want outcomes and move forward, not just continue more research. Let's get rolling.
I met this gentleman was active duty in Mexico getting treatment. Didn't want me to know his name, anything else. He said, I just want to get cured. And I asked him, what was the process you went through in choosing this specific clinic? He said, I just did the best I could, online research. Said, I didn't have much to go with, but I'm desperate to get cured of my addictions and stay in the military. And this is, as Jack said, we want to start. Is the number too big, too small? We just have to move forward and begin to give these desperate veterans a solution, something that works in a setting that it's actually medically qualified and not just guessing about where to go and how to do it.
I'm speaking with Representative Lou Correa, Democrat of California, and Representative Jack Bergman, Republican of Michigan. Congressman Bergman, let me come back to you. This is a bipartisan effort. What is driving the bipartisanship, and how do you plan to expand the folks who sign on to this as you introduce the bill?
What drives the bipartisanship, I think it's the same in any subject you go to. It's people like Lou and I who came here to serve our constituents, but also serve our country. And in our case, focusing now on serving our veterans, because when you think about what we're proposing here, if these new ways of providing therapy and helping veterans overcome those issues that they have, if it'll work for veterans, it'll pretty much work for the vast majority of the American population. And as someone in the military who served for more than a few years, we used to joke about, hey, as veterans, we've been lab rats on somebody's experimental table. I'm okay with that. Because I came to serve our country, and so did Lou. So we see this as only positive for us being an example of people working together.
And let me add to Jack's comments, which are these young men and women who sign up as volunteers to defend our country, they don't go in asking whether Democrat or Republican should serve our nation. They all serve equally, and they all sacrifice and give equally. And so to me, the job of helping a veterans is not Democrat or Republican, but it's a national job, responsibility that we have to comply with.
Congressman Correa, in one of your earlier comments, you mentioned the war on drugs and concern about psychedelic drugs. Have your comrades in Congress expressed any concern about that approach?
Well, not openly, but when you approach people and tell them about what we're doing, there's a lot that they'll smile at you and say, yes, send me more information. And that's essentially a nice, don't call me, I'll call you situation. But again, it's very hard. And again, it's not Republicans, but it's Republicans and Democrats that are very hesitant to move in this direction. It's kind of shocking to me. You always think about Democrats open to this. This is across the board, both these and ours, with a lot of hesitation. But I would ask people to focus on the veterans. 20 to 40 suicides a day is way too many. One is too many. And this is the goal of making sure we cure these veterans of what haunts them, the things, those invisible wounds they bring back from the battlefield. We can do better as a country. The solutions are there.
So, Congressman Bergman, beyond the perhaps concern about the particular medications, are there other major hurdles that you're anticipating the bill will need to deal with in order to translate this into real capabilities?
Well, if you don't think there's going to be another hurdle in life, you're already missing something, because there's, Murphy's Law, and the law of unintended consequences and all those things that happen naturally. And we just assume there's going to be natural hesitance on the part, as Lou just talked about, some of our colleagues who just don't want to have to put this on their plate. For whatever reason, they're not comfortable with it. And I get that. That's okay. That's why we're partnered together to build the confidence in as many of our colleagues as possible. We're not Cheech and Chong here. What was that hippie? Some of that, we're not those guys. We may think we're funny, but as my wife says, you're not funny. Okay, don't try to be funny. So, but the point is, we are two rational gentlemen who have been around a long time, seen a lot, done a lot, and we believe that the role Congress can play here is one of positivity, if you will, for veterans first, and then populate the rest of the population second, to live a better, fulfilling life.
And the second part is the big one. Think about it. This works for veterans. It cures them of these mental challenges they have. Can you imagine what it would do for the rest of our society? And in my opinion, when you look at homelessness, drug addiction, alcoholism, all of that starts from mental health challenges. We may have stumbled on a tremendous cure for all the above. And to me, this means we've got to dig deep and make sure we can do this right.
Congressman Correa, you've got an event on Wednesday night, a Capitol Hill briefing and public discussion on this topic. It's at the Capitol Visitor Center from 6 to 8 p.m. What do you hope to accomplish in that session?
I'll take your word that I have that event. I haven't looked beyond tomorrow. I will continue to hope with Jack, with others, that we keep pushing forward with this medication, this cure for our veterans. Again, suicides every day. I talk to veterans on a daily basis who tell me, my friend just took his own life, waiting for a cure that never came. And these are sad stories. And I'm desperate to get this medication, this cure, implemented with our veterans. I know right now, not only are veterans going to Mexico, to Costa Rica, to other foreign countries to get treatment, they have to pay cash, $5,000, $7,000, $8,000 per cure, per session. But there are also clandestine, below the radar operations that are springing up in the United States. Are they good or bad? I don't know. Veterans deserve better from us. What do I expect to accomplish on Wednesday, today, and every day? Get a system in place, get a medical procedure in place to take care of our veterans.
And Congressman Bergman, what message do you want to make sure that your Marines and other veterans who might be listening to this and considering joining that event on Wednesday, what do you want them to know?
Number one, they're not in this alone. You've got people here, Lou and I and others, that are engaged, are committed, and whoever is sitting in that room on Wednesday, I would hope that they leave that room feeling more informed, that there's a certain level of honesty and integrity involved in what we're trying to accomplish. And if nothing else, if we could light their curiosity fire to explore this more through their staff and through others, because they see the confidence that we have in making this happen and figuring out a way towards better outcomes.
And let me add to Jack's comments. We're here. We have their back. We've got our veterans. We've got their back. We want their best interest. I don't own any stock in any of these drug companies. I'm not in the business. I'm not here to make money off this. I'm here to help our veterans. A lot of those folks are my best friends. I grew up with them. I know many of them that didn't come back from Vietnam. I know the pain a lot of the veterans go through. I just want to make sure that as Americans, we do the right thing for our veterans.
Representative Lou Correa, Democrat from California, and Representative Jack Bergman, Republican from Michigan. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Good luck on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The nation's newest military service still has a lot of work to do to chart its future. The Space Force had been planning to use the new Futures Command to handle that work, and it was supposed to be up and running by last year. That didn't happen as scheduled, but the idea is not dead either. Leaders say they're still planning a new organization to help shape the service's future, but they also need to make sure it aligns with the new administration's priorities. Details now from Federal News Network's Jared Serbu.
The Space Force first unveiled its plans for a new Futures Command almost 2 years ago. The idea at the time was to combine the existing Space Warfighting Analysis Center and the Concepts and Technology Center with a new Wargaming Center. Those plans were put on pause late in 2024 when it became apparent new political leadership was on the way. But General Chance Saltzman, the chief of space operations, says Troy Mink, the Secretary of the Air Force, is on board with the overall idea.
I can confirm this 100%. Secretary Mink understands fully what we were trying to accomplish with Futures Command, with the activities, the importance of it. How are we looking at the future? How are we categorizing and characterizing the threats we're going to face, the missions we're going to be asked to do, and how are we going to respond so that we can put the force in place to meet those challenges, meet those missions? And so standing up this organization where we will look at concepts, we will do the wargaming, we will do the simulations, we will do all the assessment, the manpower assessment, we will do the MILCON surveys to figure out what facilities are needed, and then document that in the objective force so that everybody can see what we're progressing towards, what we think that end state, in the 15-year range needs to look like so that we can grow methodically and make sure we have those capabilities when they're necessary. So it is this idea of establishing a command that's focused on what is it we're going to need in the future and making sure all the planning is done, synchronized with the resources so we get that right. That's really the heart of the effort to make sure we get that right.
Saltzman speaking at the annual Space Power Conference in Orlando, Florida last month. And while the Space Force certainly isn't the first military service in recent years to contemplate a new command as part of big organizational changes, it is the first time in modern history that a service is having to do that from scratch.
The hardest thing, I think, is December of 2019, the law said there is a Space Force. And nothing could have been further from the truth. There wasn't a Space Force. It legally made there be a Space Force, but it was still in work. It was thought process. It was pulling things together as rapidly as possible. So I think the hardest thing is overcoming this mentality that there's been a Space Force for decades, for years. We've got all this figured out. There's processes. What do you mean you're still sorting out a uniform? Where's your uniform? These are hard things to do on a government scale with government oversight and government resources. And so the idea of convincing people that we had to start from scratch on almost every process we had, on every decision we make that was unprecedented, and convincing people that we don't really have anything to fall back on. If I don't deliver a service dress, then we're using an Air Force service dress. There wasn't something else. We had plenty of uniform changes when we were growing up, but there was always an Air Force uniform before those changes that we were in until we transitioned. Not the case for the Space Force. We've had to start from scratch, and convincing people that that's an additional hurdle. We're not just enhancing the Space Force, we're actually creating one. And that's been a real challenge.
The Space Force traces most of its roots to the Air Force, and until now it's leaned heavily on its sister service within the Department of the Air Force for combat support and other functions. But it's increasingly working to build infrastructure, doctrine, and culture of its own. As one example, Saltzman says just last month, the Space Force launched its own Captain's Leadership course. That initiative is a partnership with Texas A&M University and led by the Space Force's Space Training and Readiness Command.
The bottom line is each service brings something unique in terms of what it focuses on for professional military education. I remember General Raymond, when he stood up the service, talked about some of the things that services have to do. You have to have your own budget. You have to have your own doctrine. You have to develop your own people. And that's kind of stuck with me. We have to develop our guardians for the specifics of the Space Force. And this basic understanding at the captain's level is going to be foundational to what follows in the rest of their career. And so while we need to find ways to give them experience with other services, I wanted to make sure that the service had a core offering at that grade to educate our officers on the Space Force. Now, we're going to include joint doctrine. We'll include communications and leadership, but they need that foundational understanding of the service first before they start to branch out and figure out how they integrate with the other services.
And in 2025, the service graduated its first group of newly minted officers from Officer Training School. Those first 80 officers, Saltzman says, represent a mentality within the service that seeks to build multidisciplinary leaders. The enlisted force, he says, will be tactical experts, while officers will need expertise in joint integration.
Do we need deep expertise? Absolutely. Do we need people that broadly understand how to integrate with the joint force? Absolutely. How do you do both? I don't know. It's really hard. This is the tough part of the job, is you have to get that balance just right. So I think the best way to think about it is if you go down to kind of the micromanagement side of this and say, how do I develop a single guardian to best perform? Then you get caught in that conundrum. Do I want that guardian to be deep and expert in one particular area, or do I want them to have broad understanding? That creates a conundrum. At my level, I have to think about what do I need the entire service to be able to do? Do I need deep experts? Yes. Do I need broad integrators? Yes. So we have to find a way to, across the entire service, create opportunities to maximize what people can do, what they do best, and fill the jobs that are required based on those skills and those competencies. So there will be jobs where we have to focus on depth, and there will be other jobs that have to focus on broader integration-type activities. And we want to give them the training, the education, the experiential opportunities to make sure the right person has the right skills and experience to going into those jobs. And so what I would ask is just to make sure you think about it from an enterprise perspective. And what might apply to any one guardian doesn't necessarily have to apply to all guardians.
Jared Serbu, Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.
You can find Jared's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.